Alright, good morning. So it occurs to me while I was talking about flat belts yesterday that I know a thing about flat belts that I've used once or twice that I read in a useful farming skills book about the 1870s or 80s that was reprinted. And the little flat belts I'm making for these engines, taking the butt joints and just stitching them together, kind of willy-nilly, but I'm still like checking to see if they're relatively straight, so that if they try to stretch, they'll stretch more evenly across the joint. I'm also overlapping them because the ribbon is so thin and flexible that it's not a big deal, but for full-size power belts, we have modern metal belt combs, so you can just put the row of staples along the edge here and have a nice quick release metal pin to split the belt. But before those were common, and back when they were super expensive, or if you were out in the field and desperately needed to get a belt back in order, you would in fact have to lace leather belts up, and there's a particular way to do that to make sure that the joint stays straight, because if you just have these two pieces of cardboard, I've punched holes in them, the ends of a belt, you make sure that your holes are far enough back so that it's not going to pull the end of the belt off when you stitch, but if you only stitch straight on the belt, which I realize I should be pulling all this through for the purposes of this demonstration. If you only stitch straight on your belt, then it actually allows, with the stretching and movement of the stitching material, typically a leather cord, even when we pull that tight, it's pretty easy for the ends of the belt to start moving back and forth and get out of alignment. So there is a particular even pattern, crisscross, that should get used to make sure that the ends stay in alignment when you're done. And like I said, I saw this while I was reading a useful farming skills book that was reprinted from the 1870s or something, and the key is you're gonna make, and the crisscross pattern will only appear on one side of the belt, but on the, so I picked this end and started by going through straight and then up and at a diagonal, and actually just tuck that under here, and then this goes down a diagonal and then straight across the back. And then down the diagonal. You gotta keep your ends butted up evenly. Because on a big flat leather belt, if you overlap it, that joint will be very stiff and it won't actually roll evenly with the rest of the thing. And now we go back the other way. And back the other way here. There. So on this side we have the crisscross, and on the back side we have the straight here. And when you're pulling on this, it keeps the ends of the belt lined up straight. There are several ways of doing this, but the important part is to just make sure that you have your X's even count, because if you go and only double up, if your pattern works out that you're only doubling up some of the diagonals, then those diagonals, because this is kind of like a pulley system, those diagonals will pull more and your belt will still work sideways. So when you do this, you have to make sure that you have the same number of stitches going in every direction when you're on your diagonals. The straight stitches, obviously, they pull straight with the belt, so you can have those. You should make sure there's an even pattern. So I've got 1, 2, 2, 1. That works fine. You can also stitch this so you get, let me pull this out. There's another way to stitch this so you get X's on both sides. And that is just a like at that point it's just a matter of making it look the way you want it to, because X's on both sides kind of looks better. So starting with a straight stitch across the back helps you keep things even while you work. But this goes like, yeah. One diagonal, and then 2 diagonal, and then 3 diagonal. And as you can see here, I've already made it to my last hole, and now if I go straight across this way, I'm in position to go on my diagonals back. right? And when we do that, we get 1x on this side, 2x's on this side, and now that we're here, we'll turn this over and work back to complete our other set of x's. So we immediately turn and go diagonal back. But this time, as we go, we're going to put straight stitches between. So we got one straight stitch between those x's, and this is actually really hard with more flexible material. So that puts our straight stitch there, builds that X, put a straight stitch back side, front side, straight stitch, X there, and then this side completes our straight stitch on this end, and we make our X there, our X there, and I'm running out of string, X there, and then it finishes our straight stitch to that hole. And you need to then work all your material through so it's relatively even in tension all across this. Obviously it's easier with the leather belt and leather lacing because you can tug it and it will hold in the hole. My string demonstration doesn't do that. And then when you get to this part, you make sure that you finish this cross. So because this tail is longer than this tail, you can tie this. That's not really the preferred way to do it. The preferred way is to actually, at least according to the book I read, tuck these tails. So you take each tail and you, using your leather needle, run it under here like this, and as the belt pulls, of course, that all gets tight on top of the tail and holds the tail down. And the same thing, this tail goes through that hole, and then it gets pulled across underneath this side. So you end up with both tails on the same side, but the tension from all the string keeps the tails tight, and then this has very little side-to-side motion, and it's got the same number of stitches going in every direction. So that's a way to fix a belt in the field if you don't have your modern belt comb width. And the key part is just remembering the diagonals so that it holds the joint straight. Because in this design, the main strength for power is from the straight stitches pulling the belt ends together, and then because the diagonals are transferring some of their force as they get pulled on, they're transferring it side to side, they balance out to keep the ends matched up. So yeah, that is a thing that I read in a book a long time ago, and I've done it once or twice. Sometimes when I'm making these tiny belts, I do try to follow that pattern, but because it's such a small belting material and I can overlap the ends, I can just do when I overlap the ends on my model belts, I can just do a whip stitch around each end and then come back and stitch across the center. I usually do a whip stitch along the sides, and then I whip stitch both of the ends and then a row down the middle, so that I get the fraying ends of the ribbon, both fraying ends, and then I get a main stitch through the middle to do most of the holding and power transfer between the two ends. So, but that only works for really flexible material. Like I said, especially old leather belts, you gotta make sure they're good and flat, and then do this with them. If you don't have a modern metal comb and pin, so it's just something interesting, and if it's fun or something that's useful, I'm glad it was good for somebody.